There are moments in life that don't look like much when they happen. A single sentence, a hesitation, a child stepping forward at just the right time. But later, when you trace back the path that led to everything else, you realize that moment changed everything. That was the case with Logan, a 12-year-old boy who had a habit of watching closely and speaking only when it mattered. It was a Sunday afternoon like any other at the Blackstone Riders Clubhouse. The smell of motor oil and old leather hung in the air, mixing with the hum of conversations and clinking tools. Outside, the lot shimmered under the late sun, rows of motorcycles lined up like soldiers at rest. Logan's father, Michael, stood by the workbench, deep in talk about carburetor tuning with two older members. He thought Logan was inside, maybe grabbing a soda or tinkering with his sketchbook, but the boy had slipped away, drawn by the sound of a cooling engine and the glint of chrome. Near the back of the lot, Logan crouched beside Jake's motorcycle. Jake, one of the most seasoned riders in the club, had ridden coast to coast more times than anyone cared to count. He was a man who trusted his bike like most people trust their heartbeat. Logan wasn't supposed to be near the bikes without permission, but something had caught his eye. A small drop of fluid dangled beneath the brake line, shimmering green in the sunlight. It looked wrong, not the usual amber tone, not the right texture either. Too thick, too slow. Logan leaned closer, eyes narrowing. The metal casing around the line showed faint scratches, not rust, not wear, something deliberate. His stomach knotted in a way he didn't yet have words for. Just then, Jake came out of the clubhouse, keys in hand, sunglasses on, confident, relaxed, ready to ride. Logan stood up, planted himself right in Jake's path, and said the words that would change the trajectory of the next few days. "Don't ride that bike." Jake stopped, half smiling. "What's that, kid?" Logan's voice dropped, quieter but firm. "Don't ride it. Something's leaking, and it shouldn't be." At first, Jake looked amused, but then he saw Logan's face, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. The boy wasn't joking. Something in that look made Jake hesitate, and that hesitation saved his life. Michael had come outside by then, drawn by the stillness. One look at his son's posture, and he knew this wasn't about curiosity. He knelt beside the bike, joints popping as he lowered himself. The green fluid was real. So were the scratches. A closer look revealed the brake line had been intentionally filed down, just enough to weaken it, not enough to break under casual pressure, but at 50 miles per hour, one hard stop and it would fail completely. No slowing down, no second chance, straight into whatever was ahead. Michael ran his fingers along the line, feeling the unnatural grooves. This wasn't wear and tear. This was sabotage. "Don't touch anything else," he told Jake. "Call the others, now." Within minutes, the parking lot filled. 20 men stood in a loose circle around the bike, voices rising as fear crept in. Who did this? Who wanted Jake dead? Accusations followed, names whispered, old tensions reignited. But none of that would have happened if a boy hadn't paid attention, if he hadn't trusted what he saw over what was convenient. According to data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, mechanical brake failure is involved in a small percentage of accidents, but when it happens, the outcomes are often fatal. A sabotaged brake line is not just a malfunction, it's a murder attempt in waiting. And here, in this quiet lot behind a building that smelled like grease and memory, one boy had stopped it with 4 words. The silence after the discovery was heavier than any of them expected. When Jake stepped away from his bike, when Michael stood up from his crouch with that look of grim certainty, the rest of the club members knew something serious had just unfolded. No one said it out loud at first, but the air had shifted. And in that shift, something else rose with it. Doubt. Not just fear of the damage done, but fear of what it meant. Someone had done this. Someone with knowledge, someone with access, and worst of all, someone who had once been trusted. The name came quietly at first,
a murmur at the edge of the group that grew louder with every repetition. Eli. He had been a member of Blackstone Riders for nearly a decade, loyal, steady, but 3 weeks earlier he had left under a cloud. A heated argument over money owed for custom parts, voices raised, pride wounded. In the end, he tossed his patch on the table and walked out. No fists thrown, no threats made, but there was anger in his eyes, and anger leaves traces. Jake recalled seeing him near the fence just a day before the incident. Said he had been talking to Chris, Eli's older brother. Chris, still a member, still respected, stood quietly as the accusations started to mount. He spoke up when he had to. Said Eli had only stopped by to return some borrowed tools. Said they talked for a few minutes, nothing more. But no one really wanted to hear it. Once a name takes root in suspicion, everything else starts bending around it. Chris tried to stay composed, but you could hear it in his voice, the weariness of a man who had defended his brother more times than he could count. He wasn't just trying to explain Eli's presence, he was trying to hold the line between belief and betrayal. But the room had already started to fracture. Not with shouting, not yet, but with glances, with distance, with the subtle shift in where people stood and who they stood beside. Later that evening, Chris didn't return to the clubhouse. He didn't answer texts. He skipped the maintenance meetup that had been routine every Thursday for the past 3 years. Some took that as a sign of guilt. Others said he was just tired and not being heard.
Either way, something in the fabric of the club began to unravel, and the unraveling wasn't loud. It was quiet. A few members stopped joining the weekend rides. Conversations ended when certain people entered the room. What used to feel like family now felt like factions. Michael, who had seen more years in that club than most, felt the fracture settle deep in his chest. He had known Eli since the man was barely out of high school, had watched him earn his patch through years of steady work and loyalty. Could Eli be angry? Of course. Could he hold a grudge? Maybe. But sabotaging a brake line? That didn't fit. It didn't add up. Yet Michael also knew how fear worked. Once suspicion took hold, reason often left the room. According to a study published by the American Psychological Association, social exclusion and group suspicion can trigger the same parts of the brain as physical pain. The brain quite literally feels betrayal, and now the entire clubhouse was in pain. By the second night, Michael realized they weren't just dealing with a broken bike, they were dealing with a broken brotherhood. And as he watched the men he had ridden beside for years start to turn on each other, he kept thinking about his son. Logan had seen what no one else did, had spoken when everyone else would have stayed quiet. Maybe, Michael thought, it was time to stop letting pride drive the narrative and start listening for the truths hidden beneath the noise. Because deep down, he didn't believe Eli did it. But if it wasn't Eli, then someone had gone through a lot of trouble to make it look like he had. And that meant this wasn't just about one man's grudge. This was about something darker. By the third day, something shifted inside Michael. The suspicion had grown too loud, and the silence of the people he once trusted was deafening. It was no longer just about Eli. It was about truth. And deep down, Michael could not ignore what his gut was telling him. So instead of joining the others at the Thursday night meetup, he drove across town to County General Hospital.
The ambulance bay buzzed with motion. Stretchers rolled past, and voices crackled on radios. He found Eli in the back of a rig, restocking medical supplies. The moment their eyes met, neither man looked surprised. There was no anger in Eli's face, just tired resolve. "You here to accuse me or ask me?" Eli asked quietly. "To ask," Michael replied. Eli gestured toward a bench near the loading dock, and they sat, both staring at the line of ambulances parked along the curb. Eli's voice was calm. "Saturday afternoon, I was on a double shift. Around 3 o'clock, we got called to a party. Teenager overdosed on something, no one knew what. By the time we found him, he wasn't breathing." He paused. "We bagged him, pushed meds, got him back. It took nearly an hour, but he made it." Michael listened,
not just to the words, but to the way Eli spoke them, measured, tired, true. "I didn't even know Jake was going to be at the clubhouse that day," Eli added. "I've been angry, sure. I felt cheated out of money I worked hard for. But sabotage? That's not me. I run toward emergencies, not away from them." Michael nodded slowly and pulled out his phone. Together they checked the hospital dispatch logs. The timestamps matched exactly. The call had come in just after 3. Eli had been on the scene within minutes, transported the patient before 4. The records were official, logged, and confirmed. There was no gap, no window, no possibility he had slipped away unnoticed. Later that night, when Michael returned home, Logan was still awake. The boy sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of him, small rectangles sketched in neat lines, a map of the parking lot, sight lines, arrows, details. Logan looked up. "Did you talk to Eli?" he asked. Michael nodded. "He didn't do it. He was working. Saved a life that day." Logan wasn't surprised. He never looked away from his father. "I knew it wasn't him." "How?" Michael asked. Logan hesitated. "Because people who spend their lives helping others, they don't suddenly switch sides like that. Not when no one's watching, not unless something inside them breaks. And Eli doesn't seem broken." Michael studied his son's face. 12 years old, yet already reading people with more clarity than most grown men.
Then Logan pushed a small stained cloth across the table. "I found this the same day, near Jake's bike." The dark green smear was still visible on the fabric. Michael recognized it instantly. Brake fluid, but not the usual kind. He asked why Logan hadn't said anything sooner. The boy shrugged. "At first I wasn't sure it mattered, but a few nights ago, I went looking." What Logan described next made Michael's blood run cold. The boy had taken his bicycle and pedaled clear across town to the industrial zone where the rival club, the Iron Runners, kept their repair shop. He had not gone inside, he knew better, but he had watched through the fence. In the dim light, he had seen containers stacked near the dock, unlabeled, but the same distinct green fluid had pooled beneath one of them. Same color, same consistency. Michael's first reaction was fear. His son could have been seen, could have been followed, could have disappeared. But he also felt something else, a quiet awe, because Logan had not done it to prove himself. He had done it to keep others from tearing each other apart. The next morning, Michael brought the cloth to Miguel, an independent mechanic with no ties to any club. Miguel examined it under better light and compared it to sample fluids. His conclusion was simple. This isn't standard stuff. This is industrial-grade brake fluid, the kind bought in bulk for servicing fleets, not the kind you pick up at an auto store. And just like that, the story shifted again. The brake line had not been tampered with by someone angry. It had been done by someone with access to professional tools and supplies. Someone trying to make it look like revenge, but with a goal more strategic. That night, Michael sat on the porch, the cloth still in his hand, and watched the stars blur in the night sky. If Eli didn't do it, if the answer wasn't inside the club, then someone had staged it to look like it was. Someone had taken advantage of their history, their emotions, their wounds, and used them as a cover. And the worst part was, they had almost succeeded. Because until a 12-year-old boy had trusted what he saw, they had all been looking in the wrong direction.
Chris had not been seen in 2 days. No calls, no texts. His wife had assumed he was staying with friends to clear his head, but when she reached out and heard nothing, the concern turned into something sharper. It was Jake who followed his instinct and drove out to the club's storage unit, a place where old gear and spare parts were kept. The sun was still low when he arrived, casting long shadows across the pavement. The roll-up door stood half open. That alone was unusual. Jake pushed it higher and stepped inside, calling out. The stillness answered first. Then he saw Chris. slumped against a metal workbench, pale and soaked in sweat, his breathing shallow and uneven. Jake dropped beside him without hesitation. Years of riding had trained his reflexes for moments like this. He tilted Chris's head back slightly, checking his airway, feeling for a pulse that was too fast and too weak. Chris tried to speak, but his lips barely moved. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. It was more than exhaustion. This was a body that had hit its limit. Jake called 911 with calm urgency, relaying details like he had done 100 times on the road after accidents. Male, early 40s, cardiac distress, dehydration, irregular breathing, pulse unstable. As the ambulance arrived minutes later, a figure stepped out that made Jake's breath catch. It was Eli. No tension, no hesitation, just movement, professional, focused. Eli moved to his brother's side, checking vitals, starting a line, giving orders to the other EMT. Jake stayed close, one hand on Chris's shoulder, whispering, "You are going to be fine. We have you. You are not alone." And when the stretcher rolled toward the ambulance, the two men, one who had been accused and one who had doubted, locked eyes. No words were needed. There was no space for ego when someone's life hung in the balance. Later at the hospital, Chris was stabilized and admitted for observation. Doctors said he had likely been pushing himself beyond the limit for weeks. Stress, sleeplessness, skipped meals. His heart had simply refused to carry it all any longer. If he had been alone for just a few hours more, the outcome would have been different.
Jake and Eli waited in the hallway, not as enemies, but as men standing on the far edge of a lesson learned the hard way. Jake looked over at Eli and finally spoke the words that had been waiting. "I was wrong. About everything." Eli nodded, his voice quiet. "Fear makes people do stupid things. I have seen it in emergency rooms. People panic, they lash out, they hurt the very people they care about. What matters is what we do next." Jake looked down at the floor, then back at him. "How do we fix it?" Eli placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already started. You showed up when my brother needed you. That counts more than you think." The following day, Michael received a phone call from a mutual contact, someone who had worked with both clubs in the past on neutral repair jobs. A younger member from the Iron Runners wanted to talk. His name was Mason. His voice trembled slightly on the line, the words rushing like he was afraid they might evaporate. "I was not part of it, but I heard things. Deacon, one of our older guys, had been talking about making your leadership look weak. He thought if something happened to Jake, your club would fall apart from the inside. He acted alone. Our leader had no idea, but he knows now, and he is furious." A meeting was arranged 2 days later on neutral ground, an old auto shop owned by a man who had been in this life long enough to be trusted by both sides. No weapons, no tension, just leaders facing each other with the weight of recent choices between them. Michael, Jake, and 2 senior riders represented Blackstone. Cole, the head of the Iron Runners, arrived with Mason and 2 others. Cole stood to speak, his voice clear and steady. "Deacon is out, permanently. What he did crossed a line none of us are willing to defend." He looked Jake in the eyes. "That was not a message. That was a coward's move, and it does not reflect how we handle things." Jake nodded but said nothing. Cole continued, "We have spent 3 years circling each other like dogs marking territory. And for what? So we can win a war that burns both sides down?"
There is a better way. Clear boundaries, shared routes, a code we both agree to uphold. When things get ugly, we fix it fast. No more gray areas, no more guessing. Jake's voice was low but firm. If we do this, we do it right. One violation and it gets handled. No delays, no excuses. Cole held out his hand. Deal. The handshake was short. Not friendship, not trust, but the beginning of something else. A line in the sand both sides agreed not to cross. For now,
that had to be enough. The Sunday ride felt different. Not louder, not faster, just quieter in a way that mattered. The motorcycles rolled out together like they used to, side by side, without the weight of suspicion dragging behind them. No one said it, but everyone felt it. Something had been broken, and now it was beginning to mend. Logan rode on the back of Michael's bike, arms wrapped around his father's waist, helmet snug, wind rushing past them like a kind of forgiveness. As they passed the clubhouse, Logan looked back for just a second. He thought about the green fluid, the damaged brake line, the way people turned on each other because fear made them forget who they were. He thought about Jake sitting with Chris when it mattered, and Eli showing up not with anger, but with open hands. He thought about Cole choosing boundaries over bloodshed, and Mason choosing truth over silence. Honor, Logan realized, was not about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about speaking up when silence felt safer. It was about seeing something wrong and trusting your instincts enough to stop it, even when no one else believes you, especially then. And sometimes, doing the right thing means risking being misunderstood. But that risk might be what saves someone's life, or saves a brotherhood from tearing itself apart. So let me ask you something. What would you have done if you had seen what Logan saw? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent? If this story made you pause, made you think twice about trust and loyalty, go ahead and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tap that like button, subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters. And until next time, ride safe and listen closely. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths.